Nasa lesson 6 na tayo. Problem as the first step in the research process. But before I give you the lecture, I would like to have a few reminders. In our lesson on ethics, I forgot to mention that the field with the most developed ethical practice is medicine. This is because the field of medicine involves lives, and if errors are made in the research process within medical field, then a lot of people would be affected. They would not only be affected, but they would also be endangered. Their lives would be involved and they would die if we commit errors. That's why those who are involved in medical research are really very, very careful. And therefore, with this caution that they have within their respective within their field, the medical field, the ethical practice in the field of medicine has been developed among others. So, ang pinaka-developed na ethical practice nasa medical field. Bakit? Dahil sa itong medical field na ito involves lives. And if you are not careful with your experiments involving lives, there is that great danger to harm lives of a lot of people. Therefore, caution has been done in this area. And because of this caution, they have tried their best to develop an ethical practice that would more or less minimize harm on people. Number 2, reminder, I would be giving a quiz this week, and this would involve lessons 1 to 5. So all answers are found in your study guide. If you do not have the study guide, chances are that your scores would be low because answers are in that study guide, since I have based my questions on that study guide, which is your module for this subject. Now, another thing is activity 7. In activity 6, I asked you to gather 5 abstracts. And out of these 5 abstracts, you have to indicate the problem that this abstract is concerned with. So, the problem is that big question which does not have a ready answer and which requires an investigation. So, what is the investigation about regarding that abstract that you have? So, 5 yun. Ngayon, ang activity 7, in one of those abstracts, you have to analyze the objectives, whether the objectives would jive or fit into the problem. So, kung hindi na ninyo, wala kayo kopya ng 5 abstracts na yun, pwede kayo maghanap ng another abstract. So, ang abstract na ito, meron na yan siyang title. So, ano ang mga objectives? Ano ang mga specific questions which would relate to the problem to enable the researcher to gather and the information and be able to answer the problem. So, ito ngayon, pwede kayong, i-allow ko kayo maghanap ng another abstract na klaro ang mga objectives para ma-judge ninyo sa analysis kung nag-jive ba ang objectives na ito sa problem ng research na yon. Kung may mga objectives na hindi related doon sa problem na yon. So, yun ang gagawin ninyo as activity 7. So, ang activity 7 ninyo, ito nga, isang abstract. Tapos, i-identify ninyo yung problem niyan at saka ang objectives ng study. Tapos, answeran ninyo kung nag-jive in ba. Sa analysis ninyo, nag-jive in ang objectives na ito sa problem. And then, you have to justify your analysis. So, yan ang activity 7. Sa mga ABM students, activity 1, may activity 1 ako para sa isang subject ninyo, no? So, ang sa activity 1 na ito, ang sabi doon, dyan sa listahan ninyo, conceptualize a research problem relative to your strand. So, ano ba ang research problem na maisip ninyo dyan sa strand where you are enrolled? So, para lang sa ABM ito ha, kasi dalawang subjects ninyo sa akin. So, think of a problem within the strand that you are enrolled in. And then, write down the objectives for this problem. So, ang i-submit ninyo sa akin na activity 7 para sa practical research, tapos ito sa research project ninyo. Itong activity 1 na ito. May listahan man din kayo nito. So, when you write your activities, include the question so that I would know if you are really answering that question. Ngayon, kung may problem kayo, you can more or less contact me through the numbers which I have given you. Yun lang, hindi ko kayo matawagan kung Globe ang ginagamit ninyo. Pero kung ang ginagamit ninyo Smart, pwede ko kayo matawagan. Maka-answer ako sa Globe, pero hindi ko kayo matawagan, no? Kasi hindi ako masyado nag-load sa Globe. Paraging nawawala yung load ko in case na mag-load ako sa Globe. So, ito na ngayon. End na ng reminders ko. Mag-start na tayo sa lesson 6. Ang problem, which is the first step of the research process. We cannot conduct any research without a problem. The first step is always a problem, because what will you solve? What will you investigate if you do not have a problem? So, the first step in the research process is problem identification. Ano bang problem ang pwede sa research? Hindi kahit basta ano-ano lang dyan na problem. So, the problem should not be too broad. Kasi kung masyadong malawak yan, mahirap answeran. Hindi makamit sa time frame. Especially if you are a student. Pero kung masyadong malawak yan, at saka researcher ka talaga, pwede mo yan ma-divide into projects. Parang magiging program na yan, research program. Tapos i-divide mo into different projects. Tapos ang different projects may different studies. So, kung sobrang lawak niyan. Pero para sa atin na researchers, lalo na sa inyo na beginners, ang research problem hindi masyadong malawak, no? Not too broad. Because if it's too broad, it would be difficult to manage. And it's not only difficult to manage, but then you would have difficulty in answering the problem. Pero sabi ko nga, kung talagang researcher ka, pwede yan maging program and ma-divide mo into different projects, and these different projects would have different studies. Pero sa atin, we are concerned with studies, just studies as kayo, lalo na mga estudyante kayo, no? So, mga studies lang. So, ang research problem na pipiliin ninyo, hindi masyadong malawak or hindi masyadong limited, yung masyadong narrow. Kasi kung too narrow, hindi naman to siya worth na i-conduct ang research para sa very narrow question. Kung masyadong malawak, hindi naman din practical. At saka hindi rin manageable kung masyadong malawak. So, kailangan ang breadth niya or ang scope niya at saka yung significance ng topic ay more or less may weight para ma-meet niya ang standard ng worthy research. Kasi kung too broad masyado, ay hindi naman yan siya kuan masyado. Hindi mabuti na research problem. Kung too narrow, hindi rin mabuti. Kasi hindi siya mag-qualify as a searchable problem. Kailangan eksakto ang breadth niya. Tapos ang significance nitong topic mo, kailangan worthy to undertake an investigation or a research. Kaya kung hindi, sayang ang time mo niyan na hanapin mo ang answer. Tapos hindi man lang tama yung problem na choose mo to work on. So ito ngayon, may mga criteria kung paano mag-choose ng problem. Ano ang searchable problem? Si Fred Kerlinger at saka si Dr. Alice Go, dati itong teacher doon sa USM noon, pero nag-transfer sila sa Baybay State College. So, may mga criteria sila na linagay para ang isang research magiging masabi natin worthy to be searched on, worthy to be investigated. Ang isang tinagay ni Kerlinger, yung statement of relationship between variables. Sabi natin ang variables, yun ang mga attributes ng object or subject or respondent na ginastadihan natin. At saka itong variables na ito, itong attributes na ito, tinatawag na variable dahil ang measurement niya hindi magkapareho. So, nag-vary from one person to another, from one object to another, as in weight. Hindi man lahat ng tao ang weight niya 40 kilos, ang iba 60, ang iba 80, ang iba 100 plus, ang iba pa mag 200 plus kilos sila, no? Tapos, hindi na yun healthy para sa kanila. May mga effect na yun sa health nila. So, ang relationship na ito between and among variables. So, ang variable, sabi natin, attribute yan. Characteristic yan ng ginastadihan natin. Na ang measurement nitong characteristic na ito, hindi pareho. Nag-iiba-iba. Na ngayon, kaya tinatawag na variable. So, itong variables na ito, kailangan magkaroon ng relations sa research. Kung ang research mo nag-involve ng cause and effect or association, no? Paano associated itong variable A sa variable B? Ano ang relationship nila? Or ang variable A ba ito ang nag-cause ng variable B? So, cause and effect ang relationship. So, ang relationship, pwede association, pwedeng cause and effect. So, yan ang first, first criterion in an array of criteria na binigay ni Dr. Go at saka ni Dr. Kerlinger. Ang sunod, ang possibility of empirical testing. So, pag sinabi natin empirical, masabi natin na pwede siyang i-test at saka pwedeng obserbahan. So, itong collected data natin na ito, pwedeng i-subject natin sa test at saka pwedeng i-obserbahan. So, pwede mong i-repeat ang process, pwede mong makuha ang data, pwede mong i-subject sa test, pwede mong ma-observe. Yan ang sinasabi nilang empirical. So, dapat may possibility for empirical testing. So, kung ang research mo may possibility for empirical testing dahil sa makuha mo ang data through experiment and through observation of reactions during the experiment, then it's worthy for research. Ang isa pang criterion pala in an array of criteria is clarity. Kung malabo ang problem mo, hindi mo masolve. Kaya kailangan i-clear out mo yung problem na yan para may direction ka on how to go about it to resolve the problem. So, kung hindi klaro, hindi yan mabuti na problem for investigation. At saka ang isa na criteria is relevance to current issues and phenomenon. So, kung relevant itong problem sa nangyayari, then pwedeng maging research problem siya and it's worth investigating. So, 4 itong criteria na ito na dapat ma-meet ng research problem in order for it to be worthy to be searched on. Pero ito ang number 1 is association or relationship between variables. Kailangan meron daw. Pero hindi lahat ng research meron tests of association or relationship between and among variables. Hindi lahat. Sa qualitative study, wala yan. Hindi yan natin kailangan sa qualitative. Sa quantitative, kailangan natin kay may hypothesis testing tayo. So, kung mag-test ka ng relationship, kung may statement of relationship ang mga variables mo, kailangan may hypothesis ka dito kung paano sila mag-relate na i-subject mo sa test. So, possibility for empirical testing. So, dapat ang data mo testable and observable. Ito sa lahat ng klase ng research ito. Pwede ito, no? Tapos, clarity. Hindi nga ma-solve, sabi ko, kung walay clarity. And then, ang isa, relevance to current interests or phenomenon. Kasi kung hindi relevant, walang interesado na magbasa niyan. At saka walang funding agency na interesado mag-fund, magbigay ng budget sa iyo to enable you to pursue your research. Ngayon, itong tests of relationship, i-repeat ko, is for quantitative research. Hindi lahat ng research nag-require ng association at saka relationship. Ang qualitative research, hindi nangangailangan nito. Kaya lang, ang qualitative research hindi makado away with numbers. May numbers talaga na ginagamit sa qualitative para bigyan ng exact picture ang readers mo through the numbers that you include in your research. But then, these numbers are not subjected into a test. No hypothesis is ever formulated for a qualitative research. Pwede may mga assumptions ka, pero itong assumptions mo, hindi mo na rin masubject sa test, no? Na ngayon, saan tayo nagakuha idea for a research? Usually sa mga beginners, sa board of advisors nila, kaya nga may board of advisors ang thesis student. May thesis advisors sila. Itong thesis advisors, usually, binibigyan sila ng idea kung ano ang dapat nilang i-search on na worthy to be investigated. So, ito ang trabaho ng thesis advisor. Bigyan kayo ng idea kung anong klaseng mga research ang dapat nyong i-conduct. So, maliban sa board of advisors, ang idea for research problem nanggagaling sa recommendations for further studies sa completed research. Yung research na tapos na, ang researcher may nakita na mga problems na hindi niya nasali doon sa study niya. So, gina-recommend niya for further studies. Ano itong mga recommendations na ito? Kung interesado ka dyan at saka within your field of interest, pwede mo ma-pursue yung problem na gina-recommend niya. Tapos, maliban doon, ang isang consideration is your field of interest. Gaya for example nitong mga ABM students, ang strand nila is business, no? So, more or less, yung mga studies na dapat nilang i-conduct within their field of specialization and interest. Kasi kung hindi mo field, mahirap mag-conduct ng research. Kasi kung minsan may mga reactions dyan, may mga makuha ka na data, hindi mo masyado ma-explain kung hindi ka well-versed sa field na yan. Kaya, ang advice is to choose a problem within your specialization and at the same time, your interest. Kasi, makaboard man yung research kung hindi mo interest ang topic. Ngayon, mayroon dito existing issues. So, ano ang mga existing issues na patok ngayon sa community? Itong incidents ng COVID, no? Itong hinareklamo ng mga tao na nahihirapan sila maghanap buhay. Kasi, ang iba, lay off from their jobs. Kaya hindi man hindi ma-afford ng employer na patrabahoin sila lahat. So, ang iba, masacrifice nila, no? So, ano ang coping mechanisms ng mga tao na ito? Isa rin yan. Paano nag-cope up ang mga tao? Ang iba nagyaman dahil dito sa COVID na ito, no? Nag-work out ang kanilang imagination, creativity, and how to earn money. So, doon nag-start ang nila, ang pera na nagapasok. Tapos, perspective or the way the researcher views the world. Later, sa philosophy classes ninyo, may mga different views and different perspectives ang bawat schools of thought. So, kung nagabilong ka sa isang school of thought na yan, iba rin ang pananaw mo kaysa school of thought na ng isang grupo. So, depende sa school of thought ang choice din ng researcher. Kasi doon ang interest niya. Tapos, ang last dito, yung priority lists of funding agencies. May mga funding agencies na nagbigay budget for research. Ngayon, kung naghahanap ka ng funding agency na mag-fund ng research mo, kailangan within their priority lists ang ikandak mo na research. Kaya kung hindi rin nila yan bigyan ng budget. So, ito ang mga limitations for sources of a research problem. So, kung wala kang alam, so magdepend ka sa research panel, no? Sa board of advisors mo. Tapos, pwede ka rin magtingin sa, kung wala kang maisip, sa mga recommendations for further studies sa finished research. Tapos, yung field of interest mo, ano ang mga problems doon within your field of interest. So, pwede mong i-conduct. Tapos, ano ang mga existing issues ngayon na interesado ka at saka of interest din sa mga public, sa reading public. Kaya kung ikaw lang ang interesado, hindi interesado ang iba, walang magbasa ng research mo, di paano yun? Sayang yung effort mo, no? And time in collecting the data which nobody is interested. Tapos yung perspective, ang perspective na ito, sabi ko, may different schools of thought, may mga grupo-grupo. So, usually, ang mga schools of thought na ito, sila ang naga-determine kung anong research studies, research problems ang ginakandak or gina-investigate ng isang researcher. Tapos ngayon, ang isa na determining factor talaga, so limited ka rin, no? Dahil sa you have to fit in your research problem to the priority list of the funding agency for you to enable you to have a budget for your research. Kasi kung ikaw lang ang magastos ng research mo, masyadong malaki ang magastos mo, no? Ang ibang graduate students diyan, 100,000 plus ang magastos nila sa research nila, from data collection hanggang sa matapos nila ang research nila. Swerte ka lang kung makakuha ka scholarship, no? Or funding agency which will finance your research investigation and your study to enable you to finish it. Tapos dito, usually ang problems hindi man masyadong clear. Hindi ba, isang criteria doon is clarity. So sometimes you would like to conduct a problem pero a study, pero ang problem is usually vague, hindi klaro ba? So kung hindi klaro, ma-clear out ito by asking questions. Halimbawa, ang problem na gusto mo, itong COVID-19 pandemic, pero kalabo, no? Masyadong malawak. What about the COVID-19 pandemic which you would like to study? Sabi mo, siguro I would like to study the effect of this pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic. Effect sa ano? Effect sa kanino? So, habang gina-answeran mo, naga-clear out ang problem. So, nag-start ka sa COVID-19 pandemic, ano ang gusto mo na studyhan dito? Ang effect. Marami man effect. Effect na ano? Effect on the learning process of students during pandemic. Anong klaseng effect ito? So, effect sa learning. Anong effect na gusto mong makita dito sa learning? Ang knowledge increase, ang difficulty in connectivity. So, marami. Kung ano ang gusto mo diyan, problems in connectivity of learners and their teachers during pandemic. Saan banda mo ito studyhan? Sabihin mo in Mitsayap. So, the problem of connectivity between learners and teachers during the pandemic period in Mitsayap during the first semester of school year 2020-2021. So, habang gina-question mo, habang gina-answeran mo, ma-clear out mo ang problem. So, one way of clearing out the problem is by asking question. Another way is by stating the overall objective or goal of this research and splitting this into objectives. And number 3, another way of clearing out the problem is for you to formulate your hypothesis. If you are interested in testing relationships between and among variables. Ngayon, if you are working on a problem, you have also to pay attention to objectives. These are specific target information which, when gathered, will enable you to answer the problem. So, ano ang mabuting objective? Ito naka-summarize sa acronym na SMART, no? So, the objective has to be specific. Kasi kung hindi specific ang objective, hindi mo alam kung ano ngayon ang i-gather mo na data. Kailangan specific ka kung ano yun ang gusto mo na i-gather doon. So, specific. Tapos, kailangan yung mag-gather mo na data measurable. Ma-measure mo. Kaya kung hindi mo ma-measure, hindi siya magiging empirical. Hindi mo ma-test, hindi mo subject sa test. Tapos, ang isa niya is attainable. Mahirap man yung objective mo na hindi mo ma-attain. Failure ang study mo kung hindi mo ma-attain ang objective mo. So, kailangan mag-objective ka. Pag may objective ka, ma-attain mo ang objective mo. Tapos, kailangan realistic. Hindi yung gina-imagine mo. Kay hindi mo man makita sa reality ang answer ng kung ano man yung gina-imagine mo. Kailangan real yan para ma-measure mo. Tapos, kailangan time-bound. Kasi kung indefinite ang time para sa observation mo, ay hindi mo matapos-tapos ang study mo. Kaya nga, kailangan may time-bound. So, SMART. Nandyan ito ngayon sa study guide. Ngayon, ang test of relationships, sabi natin, nangangailangan ng hypothesis. Ang hypothesis, educated guess yan siya between and among variables. So, ano ang variable ngayon? Ano ang gusto mo mangyari dito? Now, kung ang variable kung itong variable na ito, i-relate mo as cause and effect, pwede mo ma-formulate sa hypothesis mo. Tapos itong hypothesis mo, ma-subject mo sa test. Pwede rin na itong hypothesis mo na educated guess ng relationship of variables, pwede mo ito ma-state in either positive or negative. Pero ang ginatest na hypothesis null, negatively stated, but implies equality between or among variables. So, anong ibig kong sabihin? Pag mag-test ka, ang rule is for you to formulate the hypothesis in the null form. Pag sinabi natin null, ang ibig sabihin negatively stated. Pero may sense of equality. Halimbawa, gusto mo i-test na ang level of income ng isang family may effect sa grade ng isang estudyante undergoing an online learning during this pandemic. So, ano ang isulat mo? That there is no effect of income on the learning process of a student during pandemic. So, kung magsabi ka, there is no effect, meaning to say, mataas man o mababa ang income, pareha lang ang effect niya. Walang effect. Pero negatively stated siya. Pero, kung alternative ang hypothesis, ang pagka-state mo positive, tapos imply ng difference. Halimbawa, sabihin natin that there is a difference between income and the learning capacity of a student during this period of pandemic. So, yan positively stated, pero may naga-imply ng difference. Bakit ganito ito? Kasi, kung isubject mo ang hypothesis, null hypothesis, sa test, tapos ang maglabas, significant. Ang ibig sabihin, ang na-compute mo na data is equal or greater than the tabular data, so significant siya. Pag sinabi mo na significant ang result ng test, ang ibig sabihin yan, i-reject mo. So, i-reject mo ang null hypothesis, yung hypothesis na no difference. Tapos, ang i-accept mo yung alternative hypothesis na may difference. Yan ang nangyayari kung ang result ng test ay significant. Pag ang result ng test significant, ang ibig sabihin, ang na-compute mo na data is equal or greater than the tabular data for that particular test, pwede mo nang i-reject yung null hypothesis. Kaya ang null hypothesis, siya ang ginagamit na para sa testing. Para kung significant siya, ang i-accept mo yung alternative na positively stated pero mayroong difference. So, Pag i-accept mo yon, ang ibig sabihin may difference talaga, no? So, sa hypothesis testing yan, hanggang so, ito sa last part ng lesson na ito, meron tayong different types of variables. Pero ang most common na ginagamit is independent and dependent variables. Pero hindi lahat ng variables independent at saka dependent. Malaman mo lang ito na dependent siya, independent siya pag gamitan mo ng regression analysis. Kasi sa regression analysis, may treatment. Yung treatment, ang ibig sabihin sa treatment, yung gi-introduce mo na sa experimentation, yung gi-introduce mo doon para makita mo ang effect. Halimbawa, sa mag-experiment ka ng shelf life ng isang prutas. Ang treatment na ginamit mo, ang sugar. So, sa sugar ay sa prutas na nilagyan mo ng 1/2 cup, ang treatment mo doon yung 1/2 cup kasi yon ang i-introduce mo. Tapos, ang isa naman, the same fruit, the same amount, ang linagay mo 1 cup. So, ang treatment dito, 1 cup, no? Kaya yun ang i-introduce mo na treatment doon. Tapos sa isa, 2 cups ang linagay mo sa the same amount. So, itong mga treatments na ito ang tinatawag natin na independent. Kasi ang shelf life ng tag 1 cup na prutas na ito would depend on the amount of sugar that you have placed on each of these measurements. So, kaya nagiging dependent at saka dependent. Ang dependent, yung effect. O ilang araw lang ang shelf life ng 1/2 cup at 2 days lang. Halimbawa, itong 1 cup, ilang araw ang niya? Ito siya, 2 weeks. Ang itong 2 cups, ilan ang shelf life niya? 6 weeks. So, nagavary, no? Nagadepend sa amount of sugar. Halimbawa lang yan. Pero wala natin pag i-test, no? So, dito nag-end ang lesson natin sa problem. So, problem yan, mayroon objectives. Tapos, ang selection ng problem, ang source ng problem, meron doon. Tapos, ang criteria for the problem, meron din dito sa ninyo, sa study guide. Tapos, mayroon tayong mga variables na involved dahil sa ang isang criteria nito is the relationship. Isang criteria for a good problem to search on is the relationship between and among variables. Pero sabi ko nga, hindi lahat ng research mayroon relationship of variables. Dahil ang mga qualitative research hindi gumagamit niyan.